behind the Grand Palace doors, where centuries of tradition meet modern diplomacy, a single woman carries the weight of a nation's reputation on her shoulders. As the world watches and cameras flash, every gesture, every smile, and every carefully chosen outfit becomes a silent ambassador for her country. But what happens when the pressure to be perfect meets the very human desire to be authentic? In the weeks leading up to one of the most important state visits in decades, Catherine discovers that royal glamour isn't just about wearing a crown, it's about finding the courage to shine from within, even when the entire world is watching and waiting for you to stumble. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Kensington Palace, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Catherine stood before an enormous mirror in her private dressing room, surrounded by what looked like a small army of fashion experts, protocol advisors, and royal staff members. The room buzzed with quiet but intense activity as everyone prepared for what many were calling the most important state visit in a generation. "Your Royal Highness, we need to discuss the evening gown for the state banquet," said Margaret Thornton, the palace's chief style advisor, holding up fabric samples that shimmered in the morning light. "The diplomatic team has suggested we avoid anything too bold, but the press is expecting something memorable." Catherine nodded thoughtfully, her fingers tracing the edge of a deep blue silk sample. She had been preparing for this state visit for months, but now that it was only 3 weeks away, the pressure felt almost overwhelming. The visiting dignitaries would include heads of state from 7 different countries, each with their own cultural expectations and diplomatic sensitivities. Every detail of her appearance would be analyzed by fashion critics, political commentators, and royal watchers around the world. "What about this navy piece with the subtle silver threading?" she suggested, pointing to a design sketch that lay among dozens of others on the mahogany table. "It's elegant but not too flashy, and the color has historical significance for both our country and theirs." Sarah Martinez, the palace's head of protocol, looked up from her thick folder of notes. "That could work beautifully, ma'am. The navy would photograph well against the gold walls of the banquet hall, and it shows respect for their maritime heritage." She made a quick note in her ever-present notebook. "We should also consider how it will look when you're seated next to President Chen. Their traditional colors tend to be quite vibrant." As the morning progressed, Catherine found herself making dozens of seemingly small decisions that would have significant impacts. The height of her heels for the garden reception needed to be practical for walking on grass but formal enough for photographs. Her jewelry selection required balancing pieces that honored both countries' histories while avoiding anything that might be seen as too extravagant during economically challenging times. "Ma'am, we've received the final guest list for the private dinner," announced James Wellington, her private secretary, as he entered the room with a stack of documents. "There have been some last-minute additions that might affect our seating arrangements and conversation topics." Catherine accepted the papers and began reviewing the names and brief biographies. Each guest represented not just themselves but entire industries, cultural movements, or political positions. She would need to be prepared to discuss everything from renewable energy initiatives to cultural exchange programs, all while maintaining the perfect balance of warmth and formality that her role demanded. The afternoon brought a different kind of preparation. Catherine made her way to the palace's private gym, where her fitness trainer was waiting with a workout routine designed specifically for the demands of the upcoming visit. Standing for hours in heels, maintaining perfect posture during lengthy ceremonies, and projecting energy and enthusiasm throughout multiple events required more physical preparation than most people realized. "Your endurance has improved significantly over the past month," noted her trainer, Rebecca, as Catherine completed a series of exercises designed to strengthen her core and improve her posture. "The breathing techniques we've been practicing should help with any nervousness during the speeches." After her workout, Catherine joined her senior staff in the blue drawing room for their daily briefing. The walls were lined with portraits of previous royals who had hosted their own historic state visits, and she often found herself drawing inspiration from their painted expressions of confidence and grace. "The security arrangements have been finalized," reported Chief Inspector David Thompson. "We've worked closely with the visiting delegation's security teams to ensure everything runs smoothly. The motorcade routes have been adjusted twice based on traffic patterns and public safety considerations." Catherine listened carefully to each update, asking questions about timing, logistics, and contingency plans. She had learned that successful royal events depended not just on her own performance but on the seamless coordination of hundreds of people working behind the scenes. As evening approached, she found a few precious minutes alone in her private study. The room was quiet except for the soft ticking of an antique clock and the distant sounds of London traffic. She opened her leather-bound notebook and began reviewing her speaking notes for the various addresses she would deliver during the visit. Her first speech would welcome the visiting dignitaries and set the tone for the entire visit. She had worked with speechwriters to craft words that would be warm and personal while acknowledging the serious diplomatic work ahead. The second speech, at the cultural exchange ceremony, needed to celebrate the artistic and intellectual connections between the nations while inspiring future collaboration. The phone rang softly, and Catherine answered to hear her mother's familiar voice. "Darling, how are the preparations going?" Queen Elizabeth asked with genuine concern. "I know these major visits can feel overwhelming, but remember that you've been training for this your entire adult life." "I keep thinking about all the things that could go wrong," Catherine admitted, settling back in her chair. "What if I say the wrong thing during the toast? What if my outfit choices send unintended messages? What if the weather doesn't cooperate for the garden party?" "Those are exactly the kinds of concerns that show you're taking this seriously," her mother reassured her. "But, remember, diplomacy is ultimately about human connection. Your genuine warmth and interest in people will matter more than perfect protocol or flawless weather." After the call, Catherine walked through the palace corridors, noting the ongoing preparations everywhere she looked. Florists were creating arrangements that would welcome guests while reflecting both countries' national flowers. The kitchen staff was perfecting menus that would accommodate various dietary restrictions while showcasing the best of British cuisine. Even the housekeeping team was working extra hours to ensure every surface gleamed and every detail reflected the respect being shown to their important guests. She paused in the portrait gallery, looking up at paintings of royal women who had faced their own moments of public scrutiny and diplomatic pressure. Their painted faces seemed to whisper encouragement across the centuries, reminding her that she was part of a long tradition of women who had used their positions to build bridges between nations and cultures. Back in her private apartments, Catherine began her evening routine of reviewing cultural briefings about each visiting country. She studied their histories, current political situations, economic challenges, and cultural achievements. Tomorrow she would meet with academic experts who could provide deeper insights into the nuances of each delegation's expectations and interests. As she prepared for bed, Catherine reflected on how much her life had changed since accepting her royal responsibilities. The girl who had once worried about university exams and career choices now found herself preparing to help shape international relationships and cultural understanding. The weight of that responsibility was enormous, but she was beginning to understand that it also represented an incredible opportunity to make a positive difference in the world. The last thing she did before sleep was to review her schedule for the following day, which would include dress fittings, speech rehearsals, and meetings with protocol experts. Each day brought her closer to the moment when months of preparation would culminate in a few crucial days that would be remembered and analyzed for years to come. As she turned off the light, Catherine felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement about the challenges ahead, knowing that she was as prepared as anyone could be for such a momentous occasion. The second week of preparations began with an unexpected challenge that would test Catherine's adaptability and diplomatic skills. She was reviewing final menu choices in the palace's formal dining room when her private secretary burst through the doors with an expression that immediately put her on alert. "Ma'am, we've just received word that President Nakamura will be bringing his 12-year-old granddaughter to several events," James announced, slightly out of breath. "This wasn't in the original planning documents, and it changes several aspects of our protocol arrangements." Catherine set down her teacup and considered this development. Having a child present at formal state functions would require adjustments to everything from seating arrangements to conversation topics, but it also presented a wonderful opportunity to showcase the more personal, family-oriented aspects of royal hospitality. "This is actually lovely news," she said, surprising her staff with her immediate positive response. "Children often bring out the best in diplomatic gatherings. Let's think about how we can make this special for her while maintaining the dignity of the occasion." Over the next several hours, Catherine worked with her team to reimagine portions of the visit. They arranged for a special tour of the palace's art collection that would include pieces likely to interest a young person, and they planned a private tea where the granddaughter could meet some young British students involved in cultural exchange programs. The following day brought Catherine to one of London's most prestigious fashion houses, where the final fittings for her state visit wardrobe were taking place. The atelier was a whirlwind of activity, with seamstresses making minute adjustments to ensure each outfit would photograph perfectly and allow for comfortable movement during long ceremonial events. "The emerald evening gown is stunning, but we need to adjust the neckline slightly," noted the head designer, studying Catherine's reflection in the three-way mirror. "The original design was perfect for the sketches, but we want to ensure it's appropriate for the formal photographs that will appear in history books." Catherine stood patiently as the seamstresses worked around her, pinning and adjusting. She had learned to appreciate these quiet moments in the midst of busy preparation periods. The repetitive nature of fittings gave her time to think through the various scenarios she might encounter during the visit. "What about accessories for the garden party outfit?" asked the designer's assistant, holding up several options. "We want something that will complement the floral patterns without competing with the natural beauty of the gardens." As they discussed jewelry and shoe options, Catherine's mind wandered to the broader significance of her fashion choices. Each outfit would be photographed hundreds of times and analyzed by fashion experts worldwide. Beyond the immediate visual impact, her clothing choices would communicate messages about British style, respect for visiting cultures, and her own personality and values. That afternoon, Catherine traveled to a nearby elementary school that had been selected to provide young performers for one of the cultural events. She wanted to meet the children beforehand and help them feel comfortable with their important role in the state visit. "Your Royal Highness, the children are so excited to meet you," said the headmistress as they walked through the colorful corridors lined with student artwork. "They've been practicing their songs for weeks." In the school's assembly hall, Catherine sat cross-legged on the floor as 30 young voices filled the space with traditional folk songs from both Britain and the visiting countries. Their enthusiasm and innocence reminded her of why cultural exchange was so important. These children would grow up in a world shaped by the diplomatic relationships being built through events like the upcoming state visit. "You all sound absolutely beautiful," she told them after their performance. "When you sing for our special guests next week, remember that you're not just entertaining them. You're showing them the heart and spirit of our country through your music." 8-year-old Emma raised her hand tentatively. "Will the other children from faraway countries sing songs for us too?" "Actually, that's a wonderful idea," Catherine replied, making a mental note to discuss this with her cultural affairs team. "Perhaps we can arrange for some musical exchanges during the visit." The evening was dedicated to speech preparation with her communications team. In the palace's private theater, Catherine practiced her various addresses, working on everything from voice projection to hand gestures that would appear natural and confident on camera. "Remember to pause here for applause," coached her speaking advisor, marking the spot in her welcoming speech. This particular phrase about shared values usually resonates strongly with international audiences. Catherine rehearsed each speech multiple times, paying attention to pacing, emphasis, and the subtle art of making formal diplomatic language sound warm and personal. She practiced dealing with potential interruptions, unexpected questions, and technical difficulties that might arise during live broadcasts. "Your delivery has become much more natural," noted the communications director. "The key is maintaining that conversational tone even when discussing complex diplomatic topics." The next morning brought a different kind of preparation session. Catherine met with a team of cultural experts in the palace library, where they had assembled detailed briefings about each visiting nation's current political climate, recent achievements, and areas of particular pride or sensitivity. "President Chen will likely want to discuss the new environmental initiative her country launched last month," explained Dr. Williams, a specialist in international relations. "It represents a significant shift in their energy policy, and acknowledging this would show your awareness of their domestic priorities." Catherine took detailed notes as each expert provided insights into the personalities, interests, and expectations of the visiting leaders. She learned about Prime Minister Hassan's passion for archaeological preservation, President Nakamura's background as a former educator, and Chancellor Muller's pioneering work in renewable energy technology. The key is finding authentic connection points, advised Dr. Martinez, who specialized in diplomatic protocol. Each of these leaders will appreciate genuine interest in their country's achievements and challenges, but they'll also recognize scripted responses immediately. That afternoon, Catherine joined the palace kitchen staff for a tasting session of the proposed state banquet menu. Executive Chef Thompson had created dishes that honored both British culinary traditions and the food cultures of the visiting nations, while accommodating the various dietary restrictions and preferences of the guests. The main course features British lamb prepared with spices and techniques that reflect each visiting country's cuisine, explained the chef as Catherine sampled each carefully crafted dish. We want the meal to tell a story of cultural connection through food. Catherine particularly appreciated a dessert that combined traditional British ingredients with presentation styles inspired by the visiting nation's artistic traditions. This is exactly the kind of thoughtful detail that makes guests feel truly welcomed, she observed. As the week progressed, Catherine found herself developing a deeper appreciation for the enormous team effort required to make a state visit successful. From the florists creating arrangements that would remain beautiful under hot television lights to the security personnel coordinating with multiple international agencies, hundreds of people were working to ensure every detail would be perfect. Her final major preparation session of the week involved a complete dress rehearsal in the throne room. Staff members played the roles of visiting dignitaries while Catherine practiced every aspect of the formal reception ceremony, from the initial greetings to the presentation of gifts to the final farewell photographs. Remember, ma'am, President Chen prefers a firm handshake and direct eye contact, reminded the protocol advisor. Chancellor Muller appreciates a moment of conversation before moving to formal photographs, and Prime Minister Hassan has specifically requested to see the palace's rare book collection. As Catherine went through the motions of greeting, conversing, and posing for imaginary cameras, she felt her confidence growing. The movements that had felt awkward and formal during early rehearsals now flowed naturally. She was beginning to embody the role rather than simply performing it. The week concluded with a private dinner where Catherine hosted several British cultural figures who would be attending various state visit events. The conversation flowed from discussions of contemporary art to shared memories of previous royal occasions, and Catherine found herself genuinely enjoying the company while also gathering insights into how cultural events could best showcase British achievements. As she reflected on the week's progress, Catherine realized that her initial nervousness was transforming into excitement. The meticulous preparation was giving her the confidence to focus less on protocol perfection and more on the human connections that would make the visit meaningful for everyone involved. She was beginning to understand that true royal glamour wasn't about flawless execution of predetermined plans, but about bringing warmth, authenticity, and genuine interest to every interaction, no matter how formal the setting. The third week of preparation brought an intensity that Catherine had never experienced before. With only 7 days remaining until the state visit, every decision took on heightened significance, and the palace buzzed with an energy that was both exciting and slightly overwhelming. Catherine's day began at 5:30 in the morning with a private yoga session in her apartments. She had discovered that starting each day with quiet movement and breathing exercises helped her maintain calm focus amid the constant activity surrounding her. As she moved through familiar poses, she could hear the distant sounds of delivery trucks arriving with flowers, specialized equipment, and diplomatic supplies. "Ma'am, we have a situation that requires your immediate attention," announced her private secretary as she finished her morning routine. James's expression was serious but not panicked, which Catherine had learned usually meant a diplomatic challenge rather than a security concern. In her private study, Catherine found her senior advisors gathered around a conference table covered with newspapers and digital tablets displaying international news headlines. The overnight news cycle had brought unexpected developments in one of the visiting countries that could potentially affect the tone and content of the state visit. "There's been a significant political development in President Nakamura's country," explained her foreign affairs advisor, Dr. Richardson. "A major trade agreement was announced yesterday that changes their economic position substantially. We need to adjust our talking points to acknowledge this news appropriately." Catherine studied the briefing materials quickly, her mind racing through the implications. This actually presents an opportunity to congratulate them on this achievement, she realized. We can frame it as an example of the kind of forward-thinking leadership that makes international cooperation so valuable. The crisis management session continued for 2 hours as Catherine worked with her team to revise speech content, adjust conversation topics, and prepare responses to likely media questions about the political developments. She was impressed by her own ability to think strategically about complex international issues while maintaining focus on her role as a gracious host. The afternoon brought the final dress rehearsal for the state banquet, held in the actual ballroom where the event would take place. Catherine wore one of her formal gowns to practice moving gracefully in the heavy fabric and long train. The ballroom had been transformed with spectacular floral arrangements, gleaming crystal, and carefully positioned lighting that would enhance photographs without creating harsh shadows. "The receiving line will form here," explained the palace's chief of staff, indicating a spot near the ballroom's main entrance. "You'll have approximately 30 seconds with each guest couple, enough time for meaningful acknowledgement without creating delays." Catherine practiced the intricate dance of formal reception protocol. Each greeting required the perfect balance of warmth and dignity, and she needed to transition smoothly from one conversation to another while being constantly photographed. She rehearsed the specific cultural greeting customs preferred by each delegation, from handshakes to slight bows to the particular phrases that would show respect for their traditions. "Remember, ma'am, Chancellor Miller's wife is a renowned botanist," whispered the protocol advisor during a practice session. "A brief comment about the garden tours we've arranged would be particularly appreciated." As the rehearsal progressed, Catherine found herself enjoying the challenge of remembering personal details about dozens of guests while maintaining the graceful formality that the occasion demanded. She was developing an intuitive sense for the timing and rhythm of large formal events. That evening, she met with the palace's head of security for a final briefing about crowd management and emergency procedures. While Catherine rarely worried about security issues, the scale of this visit required heightened precautions that affected everything from her movement between venues to the timing of her public appearances. "We've coordinated with 7 different international security services," explained Commander Thompson. "The level of cooperation has been excellent, but it means our normal routines will be modified throughout the visit." Catherine listened carefully to explanations of evacuation routes, communication protocols, and the subtle signals that security personnel would use to coordinate her movements. She appreciated the thoroughness of the planning while hoping that none of these precautions would be necessary. The next day brought Catherine to the Royal Opera House for a rehearsal of the cultural performance that would highlight the state visit's artistic elements. She sat in the royal box, watching as British performers rehearsed alongside artists from the visiting countries who had arrived early to prepare for their joint presentations. "This collaboration has been extraordinary," noted the artistic director as they watched dancers from 4 different countries create a unified performance that celebrated both individual cultural traditions and shared artistic expressions. "The artists have found common themes in their various traditions that create a beautiful narrative about human connection." Catherine was moved by the performance, particularly a segment where children's choirs from all the represented countries sang together in a specially composed piece that wove traditional melodies into a harmonious whole. She made notes about specific moments she wanted to reference in her remarks at the cultural ceremony. The following morning brought the arrival of advance teams from the visiting delegations. Catherine met with the protocol representatives from each country to review final details and address any last-minute concerns or special requests. President Chen's delegation has asked about the possibility of a brief private moment for meditation before the formal dinner, reported the chief protocol officer. They've requested a quiet space that would allow for this important personal ritual. Catherine immediately suggested the palace's small chapel, which could provide the peaceful environment needed while remaining within the security perimeter. These kinds of personal considerations, she was learning, often meant more to visiting dignitaries than elaborate formal gestures. The week's intensity reached a peak during the final security sweep of all venues. Catherine accompanied security teams as they conducted last-minute checks of the ballroom, garden areas, and private reception spaces. She used this opportunity to visualize herself moving through each space during the actual events, mentally rehearsing transitions and identifying potential challenges. "The garden party will be our most complex logistical challenge," observed the head of operations as they walked through the elaborate outdoor setup. "Weather remains favorable, but we have contingency plans for every scenario from light rain to strong winds." Catherine examined the garden arrangements, noting how pathways had been subtly reinforced to accommodate formal footwear, and how seating areas had been positioned to facilitate natural conversation while maintaining clear sightlines for photographers and security personnel. That afternoon, she participated in a final run-through of media protocols with the palace's communications team. They practiced everything from impromptu interviews to formal photo sessions, with particular attention to maintaining composed elegance while dealing with the intense interest that would surround every moment of the visit. "Remember, ma'am, the international media will be looking for authentic moments that show personality alongside formality," advised the press secretary. "Your natural warmth is your greatest asset in these situations." Catherine practiced responding to likely questions about everything from fashion choices to political topics, learning to give answers that were both informative and diplomatically appropriate. She was developing confidence in her ability to think quickly while maintaining the measured responses that her position required. The week concluded with a private dinner for the British officials who would play key roles during the state visit. Catherine hosted cabinet ministers, cultural leaders, and senior civil servants in an informal setting that allowed for final coordination and relationship building. "Your preparation has been impressive to witness," commented the Foreign Secretary during the evening. "You've grown remarkably in your understanding of both the ceremonial and substantive aspects of international diplomacy." As the evening progressed, Catherine found herself enjoying substantive conversations about policy issues, cultural trends, and international relations. She realized that her intensive preparation period had not only equipped her for the specific requirements of the state visit but had also deepened her understanding of her role as a bridge between British society and the international community. The final night before the state visit arrival, Catherine stood alone in the throne room, surrounded by the preparations that would soon welcome some of the world's most important leaders. The space was magnificent in its formal grandeur, but she had learned to see beyond the intimidating protocol to the human connections that would bring meaning to the elaborate ceremonies. As she walked through the quiet palace corridors, Catherine reflected on how much had changed in her understanding of royal responsibility over the past 3 weeks. She had begun the preparation period focused on avoiding mistakes and meeting expectations. Now she felt ready to embrace the opportunity to create meaningful diplomatic and cultural exchanges that could have lasting positive effects. Her final preparation was simple and personal. She wrote brief, private notes to herself about each visiting leader, capturing her genuine hopes for productive conversations and meaningful connections. These personal reminders would help her maintain authentic engagement even during the most formal moments of the upcoming visit. The morning of the first arrival dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of perfect British weather that seemed almost too good to be true. Catherine stood at her bedroom window, watching the early morning activity in the palace courtyard as security teams conducted final sweeps and staff members made last-minute adjustments to the elaborate welcome preparations. Her day began earlier than usual, at 4:30 in the morning, with a comprehensive briefing from her security detail about the day's timeline and any overnight developments that might affect the planned events. She was pleased to learn that all the visiting delegations had arrived safely in London and were settled in their accommodations without incident. "Ma'am, President Chen's advance team has confirmed that she's particularly looking forward to the garden tour," reported her private secretary as Catherine reviewed the day's detailed schedule over breakfast. "They've also mentioned that she brought a special gift that she's excited to present during the private reception." Catherine felt a flutter of anticipation mixed with nerves as she realized that months of preparation were about to become reality. The theoretical scenarios they had rehearsed were about to become actual conversations with real people whose decisions would affect millions of their citizens. Her morning beauty routine had been carefully planned to ensure she would look fresh and energetic throughout a day that would extend past midnight. Her hairstylist and makeup artist worked with practiced efficiency, creating a look that would photograph beautifully under various lighting conditions while allowing her natural personality to shine through. "We want elegance that doesn't overshadow your natural warmth," explained her makeup artist as she applied the final touches. "The goal is for people to remember your genuine engagement with the guests rather than focusing on your appearance." Catherine's first outfit of the day was a carefully chosen ensemble that balanced formality with approachability. The deep blue dress complemented her coloring while the structured jacket provided the dignified silhouette appropriate for welcoming heads of state. Her jewelry featured pieces with historical significance that honored both British traditions and the cultural heritage of the visiting countries. As she made her final preparations, Catherine could hear the distant sounds of crowds gathering along the processional route. Thousands of people had come to witness this historic occasion, and she felt the weight of their excitement and expectations. She was representing not just the royal family, but the hopes and values of everyone who had traveled to be part of this moment. The first arrival ceremony took place in the palace's main courtyard, transformed for the occasion with elaborate floral displays and ceremonial guards in full dress uniform. Catherine took her position at the top of the grand staircase, feeling the significance of the moment as she prepared to welcome the first delegation. President Chen's motorcade arrived precisely on schedule, the black vehicles moving through the palace gates with practiced precision. As the president emerged from her car, Catherine felt a moment of genuine pleasure at finally meeting the woman whose achievements and leadership style she had studied so extensively during her preparation period. "President Chen, welcome to London," Catherine said as they met at the base of the stairs. "We are honored to have you here, and I'm particularly excited to hear about your country's remarkable environmental initiatives." The president's face lit up with genuine pleasure at this immediate acknowledgement of her nation's recent achievements. "Your Royal Highness, thank you for such a warm welcome. I've been looking forward to our conversations about how our countries can work together on these crucial issues." As they walked together toward the palace entrance, Catherine felt the natural rhythm of diplomatic conversation flowing easily. Her extensive preparation allowed her to engage authentically rather than simply following scripted interactions. The cameras captured their obvious mutual respect and interest, creating exactly the kind of positive imagery that successful state visits required. The private reception that followed gave Catherine her first real test of managing multiple complex conversations simultaneously. She moved gracefully between different groups, spending meaningful time with each visitor while maintaining awareness of the overall flow of the event. "Chancellor Miller, I understand you've had remarkable success with your renewable energy programs," she said during one conversation. "I'd love to hear about the challenges you've overcome in implementing such ambitious changes." The Chancellor's enthusiastic response revealed the passion behind her policy work, and Catherine found herself genuinely engaged in a detailed discussion about the intersection of environmental protection and economic development. These were exactly the kinds of substantive conversations she had hoped to facilitate. Prime Minister Hassan proved to be particularly charming, with a warm sense of humor that immediately put everyone around him at ease. When Catherine mentioned the special exhibition of ancient manuscripts that had been arranged for his visit, his excitement was infectious. "Your Royal Highness, this is beyond what I had dared to hope for," he said with obvious delight. "To see these historical treasures in person will be the highlight of my entire visit." President Nakamura's granddaughter, 12-year-old Yuki, brought a wonderful energy to the formal proceedings. Catherine had arranged for her to meet some young British students involved in international exchange programs, and watching their immediate friendship develop reminded everyone present of the human connections that made diplomacy meaningful. "Yuki is teaching me some Japanese phrases," announced 10-year-old Emma, one of the British children. "And I'm showing her how to play cricket in the garden later." The lunch that followed provided Catherine with her first extended opportunity for deeper conversations with each leader. Seated strategically to facilitate natural discussion flow, she found herself discussing everything from educational policy to cultural preservation with genuine enthusiasm and growing confidence. "The key to successful international cooperation," observed President Chen during one particularly engaging exchange, "is finding leaders who understand that our shared challenges require collaborative solutions." Catherine realized that her months of preparation were allowing her to contribute meaningfully to these discussions rather than simply facilitating them. Her genuine interest in each country's achievements and challenges created space for authentic diplomatic engagement. The afternoon garden party presented different challenges, with over 200 guests including diplomats, cultural figures, and representatives from various organizations involved in international cooperation. Catherine moved through the crowd with practiced grace, making each person feel welcomed and valued while maintaining the elegant formality that the occasion required. "Your Royal Highness, the arrangements are absolutely spectacular," commented the ambassador from President Chen's country. "The attention to detail shows tremendous respect for our cultural traditions." Catherine was particularly pleased when she overheard conversations between guests from different countries, discovering shared interests and potential collaboration opportunities. The garden party was serving its intended purpose of creating connections that would extend far beyond the formal diplomatic meetings. As the sun began to set, Catherine retreated briefly to change for the evening's state banquet. The elaborate gown she had selected months earlier felt both magnificent and comfortable, and she was grateful for the extensive fittings that ensured she could move with confidence throughout the lengthy formal dinner. The banquet itself was a masterpiece of diplomatic hosting. Catherine delivered her welcoming speech with warmth and authority, touching on themes of international cooperation, cultural exchange, and shared hopes for the future. The response from the assembled guests was genuinely enthusiastic, and she could see in their faces that her words had resonated. Tonight we celebrate not just the friendship between our nations, but the infinite possibilities that emerge when people of goodwill choose to work together, she concluded, raising her glass for the traditional toast. The dinner conversation flowed naturally, with Catherine facilitating discussions that ranged from serious policy topics to lighter cultural exchanges. She was delighted when President Nakamura's granddaughter, seated at a nearby table with young people from all the represented countries, burst into giggles at something one of the British children had said. "This is exactly what diplomacy should look like," murmured Chancellor Mueller to Catherine during a quiet moment. "Formal enough to show proper respect, but human enough to build real relationships." As the evening progressed through multiple courses and ceremonial presentations, Catherine felt a growing sense of accomplishment. The months of intensive preparation had created a foundation that allowed her to focus on genuine engagement rather than protocol concerns. She was truly enjoying these remarkable conversations with some of the world's most interesting and accomplished leaders. The gift exchange ceremony provided some of the evening's most memorable moments. Each country had brought treasures that reflected their cultural heritage and artistic achievements. Catherine was moved by the thoughtfulness of each selection and the stories behind the various pieces. "This represents 500 years of our artistic tradition," President Chen explained as she presented an intricate silk scroll painting. "We hope it will remind you of the conversations we've shared and the friendship between our peoples." As the formal banquet concluded and guests moved to the reception rooms for continued conversation, Catherine reflected on how naturally the elaborate evening had unfolded. What had seemed overwhelmingly complex during preparation now felt like a series of meaningful human interactions that happened to take place in a spectacular setting. The day's final moments were spent in private conversations with each delegation head, providing opportunities for more personal exchanges about their hopes for ongoing cooperation and friendship. These quiet conversations, away from cameras and formal protocol, revealed the genuine warmth and mutual respect that had developed throughout the day. As Catherine finally returned to her private apartments well past midnight, she felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond simply having executed a successful event. She had discovered her own capacity for meaningful diplomatic engagement and realized that royal glamour, at its best, was really about creating space for authentic human connection even within the most formal circumstances. The second day of the state visit dawned with the same perfect weather, but Catherine woke with a completely different feeling than she had experienced the morning before. Gone were the butterflies and last-minute worries about protocol. Instead, she felt energized and confident, eager to continue the meaningful conversations that had begun so promisingly the day before. Her morning began with a private breakfast with President Nakamura and his granddaughter Yuki, who had specifically requested to learn about British breakfast traditions. Catherine had arranged for the meal to be served in the palace's morning room, a more intimate space that would allow for relaxed conversation. "Yuki wants to know if she can take some of your marmalade recipes back to share with her friends," President Nakamura said with obvious affection as his granddaughter carefully examined the array of preserves and traditional breakfast items. "Of course," Catherine replied warmly. "But I have an even better idea. Would you like to help make some fresh scones in the palace kitchen? Our head chef would be delighted to teach you." The impromptu cooking lesson that followed provided some of the visit's most genuine and joyful moments. Watching a 12-year-old girl and a head of state work together to create perfectly flaky scones while chatting about everything from school subjects to favorite books reminded Catherine why personal connections were the foundation of successful diplomacy. "This is exactly what I hope to share with Yuki," President Nakamura confided to Catherine as they watched his granddaughter carefully measure flour under the chef's patient guidance. "These human moments teach more about British culture than any formal presentation could." The morning's official program included a tour of the palace's private art collection, where Catherine had the pleasure of watching each leader's face light up as they encountered masterpieces they had only seen in photographs. Chancellor Muller spent an extended period studying the environmental themes in several landscape paintings, while Prime Minister Hassan was fascinated by the historical manuscripts that documented centuries of international correspondence. This letter from 1847 describes diplomatic challenges that sound remarkably similar to issues we're discussing today, he observed, examining a carefully preserved document. It's humbling to realize how long our countries have been working together to solve complex problems. Catherine found herself serving as an impromptu art historian, sharing stories about the various pieces that connected them to the broader themes of international friendship and cultural exchange. Her months of preparation had included extensive study of the collection, but she was surprised by how naturally the historical narratives connected to contemporary diplomatic conversations. The late morning brought the visit's most substantive diplomatic session, where the four leaders met privately to discuss concrete cooperation initiatives. Catherine's role was primarily as host and facilitator, but she was gratified when the leaders repeatedly asked for her perspectives on British public opinion and cultural considerations. Your insights about how these environmental policies might be received by different communities are extremely valuable, President Chen told her during one particularly productive exchange. You understand the human side of policy implementation in ways that many of our advisors miss. Catherine realized that her extensive preparation had given her not just protocol knowledge but genuine understanding of the complex issues these leaders were working to address. She was contributing meaningfully to conversations that would shape international cooperation for years to come. The afternoon's public program began with the cultural performance at the Royal Opera House, where the collaborative artistic presentation that Catherine had watched develop during rehearsals finally came together in front of a distinguished audience. The performance was even more moving than she had anticipated, with the combined talents of artists from 4 different countries creating something entirely new while honoring each cultural tradition. This is what the world needs to see, whispered Chancellor Muller as they watched children from all the represented countries perform together. Art has a way of showing us our shared humanity even when politics divides us. Catherine delivered brief remarks before the performance that connected the artistic collaboration to the broader themes of the state visit. Her words were spontaneous rather than scripted, flowing naturally from her genuine appreciation for what the artists had accomplished. What we're about to witness represents the best of what happens when talented people from different cultures choose to work together, she said to the assembled audience. These artists have created something that none of them could have achieved alone, and that's a perfect metaphor for international cooperation. The performance itself was spectacular, but what moved Catherine most was watching the visiting leaders' emotional responses to the music and dance. These were individuals who carried enormous responsibilities and dealt constantly with serious policy challenges, but the beauty of the artistic collaboration visibly touched them and reminded everyone present of the cultural connections that transcend political boundaries. The garden party that followed provided opportunities for more relaxed interactions between the visiting delegations and British cultural figures. Catherine moved through the crowd with growing confidence, facilitating introductions and conversations that she could see were creating lasting connections. Your Royal Highness, this has been extraordinary, said Dr. Williams, a British historian who had been deep in conversation with Prime Minister Hassan about archaeological preservation methods. The Prime Minister has invited our team to collaborate on a project that could revolutionize our understanding of ancient trade routes. These were exactly the kinds of outcomes Catherine had hoped for, but she was pleased to discover that they were emerging naturally from genuine mutual interest rather than forced diplomatic courtesy. Her role as host was creating space for authentic professional and personal connections. As the afternoon progressed, Catherine noticed that the formal boundaries between the different delegations were dissolving into more natural groupings based on shared interests and complementary expertise. Chancellor Muller was discussing renewable energy innovations with British engineers, while President Chen was exploring educational exchange possibilities with university representatives. The visit's final major event was a private dinner that Catherine had specifically designed to be more intimate and conversational than the previous night's formal state banquet. Held in the palace's blue drawing room, the meal provided opportunities for extended personal conversations that went beyond diplomatic protocol. I want to thank you for making this visit feel both historically significant and genuinely human, President Nakamura said to Catherine during the dinner. You've created an atmosphere where we could address serious issues while also enjoying each other's company. Catherine was deeply moved by similar comments from each of the visiting leaders throughout the evening. She realized that her approach of combining meticulous preparation with authentic personal engagement had succeeded beyond her original hopes. The conversation during dinner ranged from policy specifics to personal anecdotes, with Catherine serving as both host and active participant. She found herself discussing everything from educational philosophy with President Nakamura to environmental science with Chancellor Muller, discovering that her preparation had given her the foundation for genuinely informed conversations. The most effective diplomacy happens when leaders can move beyond talking points to real understanding, observed President Chen during one particularly engaging exchange. Tonight has demonstrated how that kind of authentic communication is possible. As the evening drew toward its close, Catherine felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness that this remarkable experience was ending. The visiting leaders had exceeded all her expectations for intellectual engagement, personal warmth, and diplomatic creativity. She had discovered aspects of international leadership that no amount of briefing materials could have conveyed. The final formal ceremony was the traditional farewell at the palace's main entrance, where Catherine would bid official goodbye to each delegation. Despite the early morning hour, crowds had gathered again to witness this concluding moment of the historic visit. Your Royal Highness, this has been truly exceptional, Chancellor Muller said as they completed the formal farewell protocols. You've shown us that diplomatic excellence and genuine human warmth are not just compatible but essential to each other. Similar sentiments from each leader reinforced Catherine's growing understanding that successful royal representation required much more than perfect protocol execution. The most meaningful diplomatic achievements emerged from authentic personal engagement supported by thorough preparation and genuine respect for the people and cultures involved. As the final motorcade departed through the palace gates, Catherine stood on the steps feeling a profound sense of accomplishment mixed with genuine sadness at saying goodbye to people who had become real friends over the course of just 2 days. The intensive shared experience had created bonds that would undoubtedly influence international cooperation for years to come. The immediate aftermath of the visit brought a whirlwind of media coverage and official reactions that exceeded all expectations. International news outlets praised both the substantive diplomatic achievements and the warmth of the personal connections that had been so visible throughout the visit. The British royal family has demonstrated how traditional hospitality can facilitate modern diplomatic innovation, read one analysis that particularly pleased Catherine. The combination of historical grandeur and authentic personal engagement created optimal conditions for productive international dialogue. More meaningful to Catherine were the personal messages she received from each visiting leader in the days following their departure. President Chen wrote about specific policy initiatives that had emerged from their conversations, while Chancellor Muller described how the visit had inspired new approaches to environmental collaboration. President Nakamura's note was particularly touching, including a drawing from his granddaughter Yuki that depicted the palace garden where she had played with British children. These human connections will shape the next generation's approach to international friendship, he wrote. As Catherine reflected on the entire experience, from the months of intensive preparation through the successful conclusion of the visit, she realized that she had discovered her own authentic voice as a royal representative. The elaborate protocols and ceremonial requirements, which had initially seemed overwhelming, had provided the framework within which genuine diplomatic achievement became possible. Most importantly, she had learned that royal glamour at its finest wasn't about perfect execution of predetermined plans, but about creating space for authentic human connection within formal diplomatic structures. Her role was to use the unique platform and resources available to her to facilitate meaningful dialogue between people whose decisions would affect millions of lives. The state visit had been declared an unqualified success by diplomatic observers, media commentators, and the visiting leaders themselves. But, for Catherine, the greatest achievement was the discovery of her own capacity for meaningful international leadership and the realization that royal responsibility, when approached with proper preparation and genuine commitment, could create opportunities for positive change that extended far beyond ceremonial obligations. As she returned to her regular royal duties in the weeks following the visit, Catherine carried with her a new understanding of her role's potential and a deep appreciation for the human connections that made international cooperation possible. The glamour of royal representation, she now understood, lay not in external magnificence but in the authentic relationships and mutual understanding that could flourish when people of goodwill were brought together in the right circumstances.